Hey ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to do a really cool discussion about extracting information from video games out there on the market that have done things well before us, even if our game is treading new ground. And we also want to learn how to respect gamer conditioning, as I like to call it, that have come from other games on the market before our game even hits the market. So, super excited to share this with you guys. Let's get started. All right, so it all starts with your game. Now, this could be something super familiar, things that we've seen 1,000 times on the market, and we're just trying to do a different take on it. This could be like the deck builder boom of a couple years ago when Slay the Spire hit it big, and then all of a sudden everyone wanted to cash in on the deck builders and make different forms. Well, we could say, hey, your game is very familiar to the popular Slay the Spire, and there's going to be certain expectations that come with that, and we know some things to follow, right? We can just look up Slay the Spire and maybe a couple other deck builders that done it before them and see how they were successful, right? What really worked for these games. But sometimes that's a little bit harder. All right, sometimes we want to mash up two different genres that maybe we haven't really seen a lot. So for this instance, let's just say we wanted to mash up side-scrolling shooter with farming, right? Because nowadays everything wants to mix in farming and things like that. So let's say we just did grab these two radical ideas and we don't really have a game that was a side shooting farming game to really go off of and learn from, right? We're treading new grounds. But what we could still do is grab games that have similar ideas or concepts from the individual parts of our game. So and we could break apart Frankenstein, if you will, and kind of break it into its parts. So then what we have here is, let's say we want to mix some part side scroller Contra and then some part, let's say Stardew Valley, right? Farming sim, right? And then we have now that we've broken it down into more of its parts, we could say, hey, what were some successful games in these categories, right? So when we think farming sim, naturally we think games like Stardew Valley, right? We could also think something more radical, right? Some edge cases like, let's say, Atomic Crops. Why Atomic Crops? Well, Atomic Crops is farming and combat. So we can start to get an idea of, hey, did the flow work for them? Did people really engage with these systems? And did people enjoy it, and what didn't they enjoy? When we start to have a lot of work that other developers have done for us, if they fell in holes and traps, we get to learn from that. How cool is that? On the Contra end, right, the side-scrolling shooters, we can go really classic and old school and things like that. So we might think things like more modern, like Fury Unleashed, or we might think old school like Metal Slug. And the reason we bring this up is when you have a deep repertoire of games, you want to gauge more recent, and you want to grab things that are like classic, what are known as some of the greats of all times, right? When we talk about Metal Slug, it brings you back to the arcade days of back in the day. It's just holds a very special place in a lot of people's hearts. And Fury Unleashed is a very like modern and very fluid but very different take on a side-scrolling shooter, right? It's very modern and evolved. So when we extract these ideas, we can say, hey, what made these special? What made these very fun? And when we grab these two aspects and we are starting to think of ideas in our game, we have a lot of references to go off of, right? Your side scroller could, even if you're making a hybrid farming side scroller shooter, it's still gonna have essences of a side scrolling shooter. That part still has to feel good. And for that to feel good, we have to respect the player expectations when coming from that game. Where is the bar? Where's the standards for those type of games? And for farming, what are people coming to expect from farming in video games nowadays? What are these other games doing? Because players are gonna have those expectations. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is the more popular and recent the game, the bigger the player is going to be conditioned. And we'll talk more about that. Knowing perfect form before breaking perfect form. So one of the things that I like to talk about is when I used to go to the gym and work out, people would say, hey, you're not in the correct form. You might hurt yourself. And what this means is you have to really learn how to do the workout and work out the muscle that you're trying to work out. And that also includes the form and how you are working out, not just the act of doing something, but doing it correctly. And you need to learn that before you can break perfect form, right? One of the things is when you're using free weights, new people tend to swing their arms a lot, especially when they're working biceps. And imagine somebody in front of the mirror really working out. and they're gonna get swole, right? But what you see is they start swinging it because they want to use very heavy weight. So they start swinging their arms back and forth. And what people say is you can really hurt yourself that way, and you're not getting the proper workout because in a way you're cheating. Because you didn't learn perfect form first. You don't know why it's set in stone. You don't really know the rules. So you can't really break the rules, right? And you have to know that before you break it. Well, the same thing happens in gaming. The same thing happens in gaming. There's a power in knowing the norm before breaking the norm. Gamers have expectations, and these are the things that we want to be able to pinpoint and know where they lie while we're making our game. This is actually extremely important in the development process. We need to know the market our game is trying to make a splash in and what those expectations are for those gamers. There's something that I like to call with my clients gamer conditioning. Gamer conditioning is extremely, extremely important to be aware of, and this is a big point of topic with the clients that I work with. So you might ask, like, gamer conditioning, I don't really get it. I'm not conditioned. And I'll give you an example. The jump button. So when I say, hey, we need to jump on this block in a video game, and I hand you a controller, your brain is automatically going to go to where it thinks the jump button should be, right? And it's probably the A button or the X button, depending on what kind of controller you use, all the way back to Super Mario World, right? And how do we make Mario jump? And what have we adopted since then, right? Where have games really brought the jump button? And this just stays. This is called gamer conditioning, or what I like to call gamer conditioning. This doesn't really change. People are always going to expect that to be on a certain button because this is something that's been adopted through gaming. So when you're developing a game, we want to be very respectful to gamer conditioning and what those players are going to expect. I always like to think of an example of Revita and the recent Revita drop. It's another really fun, awesome game you guys should check out. And it made a lot of sense for Revita to have its jump button on a trigger button. Why? Because your right thumb was actually busy aiming with the right stick. So you couldn't aim and move your thumb to hit the jump button. So the jump naturally was on a trigger. And it made perfect sense. But guess what? There were still people and some backlash for people saying it doesn't make sense. I don't like it. I want to move jump. Because they're very conditioned. Something different feels strange, right? It could make people uneasy because there's been a lot of conditioning to have it on A, even if it's unoptimal or maybe a not effective way to play the game. Some people are more molded by this conditioning than other people. So when you're developing a game, these things could cause big ripple effects, and you want to be very cautious when you are breaking mold and rules and breaking the gaming conditioning, and you want to be doing it with purpose. But to do that, you need to know it first. You need to know the perfect form before you can break it. But you want to break it intentionally and not by accident, because that leads to negative reviews because the game wasn't thought with the perfect form in mind and breaking it very meticulously. It's breaking it by accident, and you want the ball to be in your court. Another thing that I want you guys to realize is that every time you break player conditioning, this is a chance to ruin fun, and what I like to call fun. Anytime you are going to take away and make the player feel uneasy or have to really learn something that's been conditioned in them, this could sacrifice fun. And what that ultimately equals is it could turn into negative reviews, which is the ultimate thing that we're trying to avoid for your launch. So today, we are going to talk about player conditioning in two popular and recent games, one called Dungeon Drafters and the other one called Rogue Legacy 2. I wanted to talk about these games because Dungeon Drafters is brand new, fresh on the market, just released, and Rogue Legacy just received a huge update. And it's been a really fun revisit to venture back into the true Rogue mode, as they're calling it, because that's right up my alley. So we're going to talk about these two games. And before we get into it, I really want to say that these games are super awesome, and they're definitely worth checking out. These are not critiques and analysis to say, hey, these games are really bad. No, these are very talented games. These are very fun, and you can tell a very powerful group of people worked on these games, and I definitely recommend checking both of them out. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's continue. First, we'll talk about Dungeon Drafters. And what we have here, since the dawn of man, since the beginning and the oldest I can remember in tactics games, we've always had a certain conveyance of information. It's always been very easy to access. It's always been very clear. Hey, this is where the opponent's attacking. This is what they're doing. And you can plan around it, move around it, attack around it, kill people that you need to kill. And this has always been very accessible and easy. This is the conditioning part. There's certain expectations that came with that, right? Players want to have this part very fed to them, if you will. They don't have to work for that. That stuff is just there. They don't even think about it, right? It's one of those things where if it's there, they don't even realize it's happening. It's just kind of done correctly in their eyes. So then comes Dungeon Drafters, the brand new release. And as you can see here in the background, we're going to be going through what I call its hugest blunder, and something that I picked up on right away. 10 minutes into my showcase, I realized that something was missing. Why does this feel so awkward? And it's because we had to work for all the intentions. We had to work for everything that the enemy was doing. If you see here, I have to keep re-clicking on different enemies to see where they're attacking, what's going on, because that information's not just given to me. I have to remember it. I have to click on everybody and see, hey, you're attacking here. Oh, where were you attacking? Oh, where should I go? And I have to replan everything and double check, hey, am I sure they weren't attacking this spot? And so all of a sudden you realize that we're breaking one of the conditioning rules that we have, right? We're going into a tactic genre, but we're breaking the mold of ease of information. And remember, anytime you break player conditioning, you have to do it very intentionally and for a reason, or we want to try to avoid breaking it, because that could equal taking away from fun and what we call fun. So here you can see that the player has to work extra hard for this information, and this can cause a lot of tedium and backlash, right? Every room took a lot longer than it should have because other games are giving me this information. Other games are making this very easy. Why is this part hard? And what this happened to be is something that I also like to call with my clients a compounding problem. So since we didn't catch this early and develop it, and now we're developing games around this feature that we set where you click on enemies to get their information, this is how we're building from. This is our foundation. And because of this foundation, we now have compounding issues. So it's been brought to my attention now. Imagine playing this game with controller. All of a sudden, we can't just mouse over and click on everybody. All of a sudden, now we have to use controller inputs and get over to different creatures to see their attacks. And then get back and move our person, right? And then, oh wait, what was that person doing again? Let me get back over there with my controller and work this UI. Now all of a sudden this turns into a huge chore, right? Something that would normally be so easy you wouldn't even think about in other games is now really, really, really tough to do, right? And I realized this right away. How is this possible? How is this possible? How can we make a tactics game and have something so different and break such a big rule to tactics games and then be stuck with it? At the time of you making this video, there's been a lot of talk and asking the developer, hey, are we gonna get like an intent system so we can just see it? Is this a future update? And they responded that it's too far in development now that the game is out, and that they can't fix that. It's too deep in the code. And this is the worst case scenario. This is why early consultation is so important. This is what breaks my heart, is that if you build on a foundation that's not solid, you can get yourself in a trap where you can't dig yourself or band-aid your way out of it, and you're kind of stuck with the pillar that you've piled yourself upon. So then we can go over here and fast forward, and this part is a little bit more sad. The Steam reviews, right? A lot of these turned into negative reviews. So here is a few negative reviews that we found on Steam that share similar ideas. The idea is interesting and the gameplay is fun, but it's excessively punishing. It can take multiple hours. So here they're talking about how the runs can feel really long. And in a way, you can start to see the compounding issue that we talked about, right? Well, of course the runs are going to be on the longer side. Things take longer. It takes longer to work for your information that other games are just giving you. So naturally, it starts to have this snowball effect. The UI is extremely lacking in clarity. It's unintuitive. It's a bit of a chore. Somebody says the UI feels like a chore. It feels like housework. Why do I have to work for this information? Well, guess what? This player's been conditioned to get that information for free. It feels outdated, right? It feels outdated. The basics are so messed up, right? To them, it's just, this is basic. And this is how a lot of games launch, is that like the bar is risen to a certain standard while you're off developing your game for months or years, and the bar is being changed. The bar of expectation and the player's conditioning is moving. And if you don't match those expectations, you're taking a gamble on your launch. The rest of your game will outweigh those flaws and they won't mind it because your game is so good. Do you want to take those odds? It makes the game harder and harder to be successful when you can roll better odds. Control's very awkward on controller. It's a shame that the gameplay didn't hold up for me, right? Some of the tooltips, I'm just left guessing. So imagine this, where you're working for this UI and you're working for information that other games are giving you for free, and then it still doesn't make sense. You're confused about everything, and I felt the same way. Within 10 to 15 minutes, I said, why does this feel awkward, right? And so the gamers, a lot of gamers also saw the same thing. And that's worst case scenario. The only difference is they start with different decks. Here they're talking about the cosmetics, and if the characters aren't different, why can't I swap around, right? And these are things that you can see in consultation, because a gamer's perspective, this is obviously going to be something very clear. But while you're deep in code and development, you can't see these things until you zoom out. This is the big one, I would say, and this sums it up. I'm absolutely in love with this game's design and concept. But the user interface and the experience is unfortunately one of the worst looking and feeling games I've played in quite a long time. And then they go on to talk about the controller input and things like that. And this is what we don't want. A lot of times, people that pick up your game want to love your game. They're very excited about it and they want to. They're trying to love your game. But what happens is when we're so close to all of our code and stuff, we can't see the bigger picture. We can't see how we are making it hard to love our game, or maybe shooting ourselves in the foot with how we're going about things, and we're making it harder to love, right? It's like one of those people with the very hard exterior, and we push people away from us, but really inside those are the squishiest people and they need the most love, but they're very hard on the exterior. A lot of games do the same thing. We make it very hard to love when a lot of times it could be simple. So we'll carry on here, and all this stuff was super sad to see, because they poured a lot of love into this game, as you could see. But man, it's such a big flaw, and it's like, man, I wish this was brought to their attention sooner. Let's carry on. Next, we're going to talk about Rogue Legacy 2. So we have both ends of the spectrum. On one end, you can see that we were talking more about a game that's been getting kind of like mixed reviews and people can be kind of on the fence, and Rogue Legacy 2 has this big name and it's a successful game. It's a very successful game, but we could still see some areas where we could always improve and make better games, either for the future or just to learn from it. So here we have a very funny example of Rogue Legacy 2 and our time with it in the new True Rogue mode that just came out last week. And we're going to talk about some of the kind of rules they break and how they break conditioning and things like that. And we thought this clip was pretty funny, so I'll let it take it away, and then we'll talk about it after. Oh my god. Bloody good idea, mate. What the mook are they thinking? What? We're calling a board meeting. Attention, board meeting. All staff, we're working on Rogue Legacy. Get to the office. All right, guys. We're working on the eyeball boss. We need some ideas. We need some attacks. We need some cool design. What do you guys got? Ted, take it away. I came up with this really cool idea. So, there could be this kind of like AoE attack. What do you think? And we'll warn them and make it a faint red. I like what you're thinking. Yeah, and we'll make the background red. What do you think about that? They won't even see it coming. Literally. Ted, good idea. Good idea, Ted. That'll really show them. If they have slightly bad eyesight, we'll show them. Bunch of nerds. Get better eyesight, nerds. But, I have 20/20 eyesight. I still can't see it. We'll show them. It's called difficulty. It's called difficulty. Of course, in a future video, we'll talk about difficulty and artificial difficulty. But here you can see the frustrations, and we're kind of making a joke about it. All the bad design or maybe common mistakes in games, we'll say it's designed by Ted just for fun at board meetings. But here you can see that There's a very clear, almost no-no, where boss attacks are doing red on a bright red background, right? And you have to remember, in the chaos of all of this, this is very hard, or if not impossible, to see. I want to also back forward before we talk about difficulty or get good. We also blindly beat this boss first try, the prime version, which is the harder version. First try, maybe an hour right before this fight. When we found them in a run, we beat it first try. It's not a talk of difficulty before people start having that conversation internally. This is just very much about design and clarity, and not breaking rules and conditioning. So here you can see a very clear red on red. And it's so funny. Sometimes we have to kind of zoom out and see the silliness of it, right, in our work. Because when we're face down in our work, it is really hard to see. But when we zoom out and we really talk about it, it's like, oh my god, of course this is a bad idea. We're doing red indicators on a red background. Who's gonna see that, right? Especially when they have 5,000 things to worry about. So then we go on here, and you can see how sometimes frustrations can snowball. So here we're met with the very frustrating loss, right? And it felt out of my hands because we couldn't see it. And then all of a sudden, we're also met with a choice for a character that in theory could be so cool because he wants to pogo and combo on enemies, but it's also met with frustration. You know, if you can't see it coming and it hits you, it's difficult. Game design with Ted. Dude's a beast. Dude is a beast. It's a perfect idea. No one will see it coming. Average health, great mana. Requires kinetic energy. Spin kick objects to gain kinetic energy. Gain kinetic energy also grants charged. This sounds super complicated. So, spin kicking in this game as like a major mechanic also feels really bad because Ted decided to not let you like short hop off a kick or fast drop off of a kick. You just have to float like you're an astronaut. Again, kudos to Ted. So it's like... So here you can see a dramatic, funny experience of dealing with a clash of mechanics. On one hand, we have this Rogue Legacy 2 where it's a bunch of enemies and they can shoot through walls and they're throwing projectiles at you, but you can see that there's this almost dissonance in the controls that they give to the player. I found this extremely frustrating because I love difficult games. I love it. I love the chaos. I love the bullet hell. But when the game doesn't give you the appropriate control and feel to deal with those parts, you miss that satisfaction. It feels really good when you have all the precise tools you need to conquer what you need to conquer and conquer this like a huge difficulty wall. But what happens here is when you lose that dissonance and you have these controls where it's like, hey, we want you to spin kick things, but when you spin kick, you're gonna fly around, right? You're just gonna, it launches you really high and you don't really have control of it. But it's a game that requires precise controls, right? We need precise controls. We don't have iframes, so that means we need to be able to precisely control where we're moving, because I can't just iframe damage. This is a huge blunder. And then we have classes that further say, hey, let's make this a major mechanic. So we have one of what we talked about earlier, a compounding issue. It's like things that could feel really good and exciting, it doesn't, because we're not matching it in what the game is asking for, right? It's one of those things where it's, let me love you. Why do we have damage indicators that are the same color as the background? I want to love you. Why are you making it so I can't see this, right? There's a clash, right? And that could equal fun. So here you can see the frustrations where it's like, man, I love this game. I'm going to keep playing it anyway. But this could easily turned into a negative review. Easily, right? And so we want to be aware of these things. Let's carry on here. So we found some also, unfortunately, negative reviews. Luckily this game is successful already, but we found some negative reviews of people that almost feel the same sentiment. Man, while the movement feels really smooth at first, fixed dash distance, fixed heights on some jump mechanics like the spin kick, the platforming just doesn't feel very precise. So here's a negative review where the person felt the same way, right? It's a very precise and trap heavy game and there's hazards everywhere, but I don't have the proper tools. I can't move like the character won't move like I want them to move, right? When I dash, they have to go the full distance. Why can't I control that? Or when I spin kick, why do I have to go flying into the air into more spikes, right? Why can't I control that? And I feel like this is a huge oversight, and I guess some other people did as well. I can't stand it. For some reason, I can't fathom certain enemies are only vulnerable to the spin kick. Why? Just why? Repeatedly Goomba hopping off the same enemy doesn't exactly fill me with joy. So here you can see what we call the compounding issue. Since something didn't feel right originally, the foundation doesn't feel good, you can see other issues in development are now stacking on it and compounding into a bigger issue, a snowball effect, and it's leading to frustration. Because now we have enemies that want to interact and cause you to use the spin kick, but the spin kick wasn't done the best it could be originally. So now we have a compounding issue where it's saying, hey, engage more with this foundation that's not super solid, right? And so you can see that it's also leading to more frustration. Here's the big one. The game just plays very badly. Your character movement is very floaty and not precise. The game asks you to be extremely precise constantly. The movement sections are bad enough. And the physics, and this makes the combat terrible. So here they are saying, hey, I see what the game is asking from me, and I'm here for it, but I don't have the controls. The game is saying otherwise. There's a clash of mechanics here. Right? And we have to be very cautious of that. This is the biggest no-no that we need to avoid. If we fast forward, I consider myself good at video games and platformers in particular, and they go on to say other games that they beat and played, including challenging ones like Cuphead. And they even go ahead and compliment the game and say even the boss fights are fun enough, but they just suffer badly from poor movement. So again, what we can derive from this is the information is there, right? We can't blame player conditioning. The harder the game, we have to abide and give the player of equal tools, right, to deal with the hard issues. And it's the same thing. We're going into a tactics genre. We have to give people the equal tools. What are other people giving them for these tactics games, right? What are something that we have to abide by, even if we're making something completely different? What are players going to come to expect? So as we fast forward, I just want to say that in closing, every book needs an editor, every athlete needs a coach, and every game needs a game doctor. Hope you guys found this informal, and I would love to chat with you guys over on Twitch or Twitter. And I can't wait to hear from you guys, and hope you found this. Hope you find this at least something that starts turning the wheels in your brain, whether or not you agree with everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you later.